So Gintama, surprisingly, has some really entertaining fights. And while I wouldn't necessarily compare the fights from Gintama, which is primarily a gag shonen, comparable to other fighting shonen such as Naruto, One Piece, Hunter x Hunter, etc., when you combine the elements of the emotional weight of the characters or the narratives that the fights are a part of, Gintama actually comes away with some fights that I think are actually very favorably comparable to other actual fighting shonen, especially these 5 fights right here. So, in honor of the 15th anniversary of the Gintama anime, this is my video on my personal top 5 favorite fights from Gintama. Before we get into the video, a quick spoiler warning. As well, I'm not going to go into detail of the context of the fights. I will be directly showing images and panels from the Gintama anime, as well as the Gintama manga of the fights. So, with that said, let's get into it. Coming up at number 5, we have Shinpachi and Kagura versus Abuto. While it was not Kagura and Shinpachi's first time meeting Abuto, I would say that this was the first serious fight. The first phase of this fight was very entertaining because of the showcasing of 2 different Yeto. On one hand, we have Abuto, a fully grown Yeto who has accepted and given in to his bloodlust and Yeto heritage, and on the other hand, we have Kagura, a girl who has denounced and rejected her Yeto legacy in favor of building her own reputation, a reputation that isn't associated as being a cold-blooded killer like Yetos tend to be. The difference in fighting prowess between these 2 Yeto were very evident, as Abuto is easily able to thrash around both Kagura and Shinpachi with just one arm. Despite being only 14 years old, as a Yeto, Kagura was more physically stronger than Gintoki, so to see her in the losing end of a fight for the first time was nothing short of impactful. But of course, the main phase that I want to talk about is the second phase of this fight, and that's when Kagura enters this Yeto mode. After watching Shinpachi suffer under the hands of Abuto while being completely helpless under Abuto's boot and unable to do anything, Kagura, in a fit of rage, enters what is now kind of dubbed as the Yeto mode. In this state, Kagura abandons her entire self of sanity, her entire sense of logic, as well as even a little bit of herself. All that is left is just bloodlust and the desire to kill. The moment that I saw this look on Kagura's face, I knew that something crazy was about to happen. And it was something crazy that we got. The action is quick, it's intense, and it's very hard-hitting. To watch Kagura throw hands with the amount of aggression that she was putting in was actually really exciting to watch. However, as a big Kagura fan, I couldn't help but feel conflicted as I watched this fight. Because, like I said, at this point Kagura abandons her sense of self and sanity. So the cost that she had to pay for this significant strength buff was the price of her logic during fighting. While it didn't feel like it was in her control, Kagura would tank hits from Abuto instead of logically dodging them. Not to mention all of her restraint was completely out of the window because whenever she executed a move, whether it was a block, punch, kick, or jump, she would tear up her own muscles in the process. And I couldn't help but feel sad as I watched Kagura fight in this Yeto state, because like I said, while it wasn't necessarily in Kagura's control, Kagura was essentially letting her own humanity slip in order to gain this victory over Abuto. But without this Yeto state, Kagura would have been helpless to save Shinpachi in the end. I was conflicted to watch Kagura give in to something that she tried so hard to reject. After defeating Abuto in this Yeto state, thankfully Shinpachi is able to calm Kagura down, and she never goes into this Yeto state again. Because this fight was able to set up both Kagura and Shinpachi's development for growth, I am able to look back on this conflicting moment in a pretty positive way because of the action that was provided in this fight. Amazing, amazing battle. So coming up to my number 4 spot, and that is Katsura vs Shokaku. Now I've made it well known that Katsura is my favorite character from Gintama, and when it came to fights, Katsura was kind of lacking. Katsura's fights would either be against basic nameless lackeys, and if the fight actually consisted of a significant character, those fights with Katsura would result in draws, interruptions, losses, and retreats on Katsura's end. And this fight with Shokaku was the first time we actually see Katsura become serious about a fight and want to see it to the very end. And with an opponent like Shokaku, which is literally a giant great ape, I felt like he was a perfect opponent for Katsura to match. Both have very good chemistry while fighting, and would consider this fight one of my favorite fights from Gintama from a visual standpoint. You have both fighters ascending and jumping between building to building while clashing from sword and staff at the same time. You have Katsura actually implementing his time bombs strategically during a battle. Not to mention, it was so cool being a Katsura fan and watching as Katsura matches the immense brute strength that Shokaku always provided throughout the fight. We actually get some background into Katsura's character and why he has always been prone to retreating in many fights. But what was so great about this fight was after learning Katsura's mindset when it comes to battles, just to watch him throw it all away and become a literal beast of a fighter. And like I said, become serious about seeing a fight all the way to the very end. The action was a lot of fun, and it was one of the biggest displays of environmental destruction during a fight, and honestly, I loved it from start to finish. Not to mention, this fight has one of the biggest payoffs regarding one of the longest running gags in the entire series, in which Katsura actually acknowledges his name as Zura for once, instead of Katsura. Amazing battle, I love it. So now we have reached my third entry in this video, and that fight is Gintoki vs Takasugi. This fight was heavily teased over the course of 305 episodes, and when we got this fight, it was totally worth it. This battle was one of the most strongest emotional displays that I've ever seen in an anime fight. On the surface, it's a fight to either defend or kill the Shogun, with Takasugi wanting to kill the Shogun and Gintoki wanting to defend the Shogun. This fight is probably my favorite display of swordsmanship in the battle, where both fighters are perfect equals to each other. In fact, not even a minute into this battle, and blood is spewing out of both fighters' bodies in all different directions. And so you get the idea that during this fight, while on the surface it might seem like it's for the Shogun's life, you begin to realize that it has nothing to do with that. This was a fight between two former students under the same master, Yoshida Shoyo, as well as former war comrades, and they are fighting over their respective motivations to live. On one hand, you have Takasugi, a man who is hellbent on destroying the world that took his master away from him, or at the very least lives on to get revenge on the government that killed his master. On the other side, you have Gintoki, a man who has taken his master's teachings to heart and lives on to value the connections he makes and to live every day to the fullest. Both Gintoki and Takasugi have chosen to carry on in two different ways that are both dedicated to their master, but obviously have very different outlooks on the world. These outlooks have carried these two fighters on two completely different paths over time, and here they are years later, finally clashing it out. Neither want to budge in their swordsmanship as samurai, but neither want to budge on their bushidos even more. The more these two fight, the more injuries they receive, but they both cling on to every ounce of life to continue to decimate their opponent. This was a battle where not too much was said, but not too little was said either. The two end up letting their swords do most of the talking for them. The battlefield quickly became a place for the two to vent their anger towards each other. I mean, like I said, this was an extremely emotional display between two fighters. You don't have to look far past Takasugi's voice and the pain and the anger he feels as he beats Gintoki to the ground. You also don't have to look far past Gintoki's eyes, which are normally considered dead, like a fish, but instead see it lit with resentment to show that there is a rift between Gintoki and Takasugi. I was conflicted watching this fight because neither were holding back in attempting to take each other's life, yet at one point in these two lives they would have gladly laid down their lives for one another. While showing this fight to someone who has never seen Gintama before might not impress them that much, for those who have seen Gintama up to this point can understand the emotional payoff that we're getting during this battle. Gintoki vs Takasugi is probably the perfect climax for the Shogun assassination arc, one of the best arcs I've ever seen in an anime. So coming up to my runner-up for favorite fight in the series, and that is Gintoki vs Hosen. This fight is extremely thrilling, with Hosen being considered way stronger than Abuto and even scaling evenly to Umibozo, Kagura's dad, who's considered to be the strongest alien hunter in the entire universe. It was safe to say that this was going to be a very big uphill battle for Gintoki. Two great things that made this fight awesome. One, Hosen's extreme gap in strength between him and Gintoki. With Hosen's power, he had the ability to end the fight in just a matter of a few hits, meaning that Gintoki had probably the smallest margin of error during this fight, in which if Gintoki received nothing more than just a few direct hits from Hosen, the battle would have been over and Gintoki would have died. Second thing was to see Gintoki's war experience shine through this battle, in which I would say this fight would be one of the strongest displays of his war experience. Not only do we see Gintoki demonstrate a lot of resilience to even tank hits from Hosen, but we also get to see Gintoki strategically create opportunities in order to strike Hosen during the battle. Gintoki's use of his surroundings, as well as feints, and even hiding his final blow behind a wooden sword instead of a real sword, were just a few examples of Gintoki demonstrating the fact that he has been through a lot of fights before. As a result, it made every single hit that Gintoki landed on Hosen feel like an immense payoff, all while Gintoki had to avoid hits from Hosen as he could have ended the fight at any moment. I was on the edge of my seat from start to finish, and after this fight, as well as the end of the Yoshiwara and Flames arc, I knew that Gintama was something special. So last but not least, we have what happens to be one of my favorite fights in all of Shonen, and that fight is Oddjobs vs Kamui. This fight gets the crowning achievement for being the most exciting fight in the entire series. I heavily anticipated this fight along with the Takasugi fight because I felt that Kamui would have been one of, if not the strongest opponent that Gintoki would have to face, and at this point in time, Kamui was, with statements saying that he even surpassed Hosen in strength. This first phase was probably the closest thing that Gintama had to Dragon Ball, in which both fighters would send each other flying across the cliffside, and whenever they had crashed or landed, they would create craters in the rocks as a result. While it's no surprise that a fighter such as Kamui would be able to land a hit on Gintoki, what was amazing about this first phase was watching Kamui's face of bewilderment as Gintoki would always manage to counter Kamui. Whenever Kamui would land a strong hit on Gintoki, Gintoki would follow up with a hit almost as strong, if not even stronger, than the one that Kamui gave to him earlier. To see Gintoki match someone of extreme strength was nothing short of exciting, and we actually feel like that Gintoki has a chance for a little bit. And this fight takes a quick turn from visually stunning to visually scary. I talked about in my 5th entry how Kagura was able to make up the overwhelming difference between her and Abuto by entering Yedo mode. You could imagine the concern on my face as I watched Kamui enter Yedo mode himself. Enter second phase of Odd Jobs vs. Kamui. The music becomes immediately sinister, and my concern for my 3 favorite members of Odd Jobs shoot through the roof. As Kamui loses his sense of sanity and self for a significant strength buff, I was genuinely concerned for the well-being of Gintoki, Shinpachi, and Kagura. However, what was great about this part was the highlighting of the growth between Shinpachi and Kagura that I mentioned earlier in this video. Shinpachi wanted to grow stronger so he wouldn't have to rely on Kagura anymore, and Kagura wanted to grow stronger so she wouldn't need to enter this Yedo mode like she did in the Abuto fight. And I like how this fight displays their growth. You can see the look of bewilderment and puzzlement on Kamui's face as Kagura and Shinpachi get up immediately after taking hits from Kamui, these blows being from a stronger opponent than the one they had faced earlier. To watch Kagura and Shinpachi continue to rise again and again after receiving blows from Kamui brought the excitement back into this battle. This fight is just so visually entertaining, the music is great, and it even has emotional complexity on Kamui's end, but because that goes into spoilers, I won't get into it. I absolutely adore this fight, I rewatch it a lot, and I even know it enough to replay it in my head, and it's my favorite fight from Gintama. Anyways, thanks for watching everyone, and happy 15th anniversary to the Gintama anime. Look forward to more content soon. Consider commenting your favorite fights as well as subscribing. And with that said, it's P-Town, clocking out. See ya.